Did you miss it, Dr. Dave?
Can we pre-record these openings without me in the room?
You love it so much. I heard you when you walked in the studio going whee under your breath. There we go. Welcome back, Dr. Dave.
It is good to be back, though. I want to say Melina did an amazing job, and I hope that we see her back here soon.
Probably
and
replacing me.
I am also really excited to see other guests.
Yes.
I think this brings a lot. And given that you've got more shows in you than I can ever possibly deliver.
Got a lot to say.
Yeah. We need more guests. So,
Yes.
I look forward to seeing more.
There will be more. Now, before we move on, I've got to give you a right of reply.
Yes, because
this is our one-off segment.
Because I did listen to I listened to the first hour of the podcast.
First hour of 7.
I stopped around the point that you started going into your personal vendetta against Tom Cotton.
Oh, that was. It made me feel very good.
I had to mark,
venting.
50 essays. So another hour, 2 hours is really a bit too long. Chaz.
That's okay.
I mean, Alfred Hitchcock had this thing about he didn't like to make movies more than 90 minutes.
Yeah.
Because after 90 minutes, members of the audience needed to go to the toilet. And I think that's just a fairly good rule.
Yeah.
In general. I mean, especially with movies, right?
Yeah, but there's a difference between me and Hitchcock, and that is Alfred Hitchcock was making horror movies.
Yes.
He was making psychological explorations of horrific things.
Yes, he was, yes.
Which is nothing compared to Tom Cotton. So I need at least an extra half an hour.
That one.
To communicate the full horror that is the man, Tom Cotton.
Yeah, no, I mean, most good movies are relatively short. You look at Martin Scorsese, he made his best stuff in the 70s. Under 2 hours. Taxi. Then he got too much money and too much studio leeway and too much coke and just started making overindulgent stuff. But
that sounds like me.
You know what the worst long movie of all time is?
What's that?
Gone with the Wind.
Oh, here we go.
We will come back to that piece of shit.
Very, very
later
soon.
on.
It's
but
a good tease.
Even in 1939, that was criticised for running too long. And that was back when people had literally nothing else to do for entertainment.
Dr. Dave, just for you. Oh, no, they had that little hoop and stick that they could...
They did, yes.
that they could roll around for fun.
Yep.
Just for you, I promise, when we make the movie of this podcast, I'll keep it under 90 minutes long. But moving on,
yes,
I want to give you a right of reply to the podcast that you heard that you weren't a part of. Is there anything that you would like to talk about?
There was just something that struck me about when you were talking about marketplace of ideas.
Yes.
And you talked a lot in the podcast about metaphors and arguing with metaphors. Metaphors do shape the way that we think about things, and marketplace of ideas is an outdated and badly suited metaphor, right? So it comes from John Stuart Mill, I think. I don't know if he's the first one to come up with it, but he popularised it. Back in the 19th century, when there was a very robust commercial media, but this is before a broadcast media of any kind, and certainly before the kind of media environment that we have now.
Yes.
And I was thinking, as you were talking about the Tom Cotton op-ed, really what that argument was about is it's not a marketplace of ideas. It's a marketplace of attention. Okay, that's what it was all about. It's not that, yes, Tom Cotton has as many different megaphones as he wants. We were talking just a couple of weeks ago about his wonderful op-ed in the Wall Street Journal claiming that there was a definitive link to the virus and the Wuhan lab. What people at the New York Times were upset about is the particular imprimatur that the New York Times gives to something like that. New York Times is not the Wall Street Journal. It's not identified with the political right. It is, regarded as the most sort of respectable organ of news in America.
It gives the idea of legitimacy.
Yeah. It gives it legitimacy. And also, it's an even bigger megaphone than nearly anything else, right? So it really actually does put things in the center of attention.
Yeah.
So I think it's not just about should this, because you're absolutely right. The argument's going to be out there anyway. By the way, he was just, making a fancier version of what Trump was saying in 280 characters.
Yeah, yes, right. It was like a tweet.
Yes. Yeah.
Op-ed length.
Yes. So what it's it. So I think it's time to stop thinking about marketplace of ideas. It's about the marketplace of attention.
Yeah, that makes
right?
sense.
So it's about the responsibility that the media has about, why do we give a certain person a certain megaphone at a point when I think what people were really upset about was this is at the time where Trump is making all these wild calls for the militarization of the response. And then at that point, you basically give him the New York Times, you give one of Trump's political allies the New York Times megaphone, to make this very shitty argument, but the quality of the argument wasn't the point.
Yeah.
It was, so it's not people's minds that are at stake here. It's their adrenal glands, right? That piece was aimed at people's adrenal glands. If you just look at the choice of the radical chic, this view isn't popular in the salons, look at this police captain who got killed, it's
good cotton impression you got.
Yeah, it's about it is not about the mind, right? It's about getting the it's getting that whole body response going that Trump is going to need from his supporters in order to win in November. So I think that marketplace of ideas is a bit of an outdated metaphor. I think the other thing that you got at, which is really important, is this conflict between the opinion page and the reporters. Which, I mean, we see that everywhere. Like even at the Wall Street Journal, reporters are not happy about the way that they're continually undermined.
Well, the news department of the Wall Street Journal is a good news department.
It's an excellent news department.
The op-ed page is not so good.
Yes. Yeah. Now, New York Times is better, but it's still, it does have these people like Brett Stevens and Barry Weiss, who the actual reporters at the paper, who are paid so much less than these op-ed contributors, but whose job involves so much more work, so much more I mean, Brett Stevens can get up in the morning, go to the toilet, hammer out an op-ed on his phone on the toilet, and, it'll go. And it'll be the same. It'll probably be the same thing he said a lot of times. I don't think there should even be regular opinion columnists because I actually don't think that there's anyone, no matter how good they are, who actually has a good opinion every week.
Yeah.
Right? You're either going to be chucking out bad opinions or you're, or you're going to be recycling them. So, I think that we're going to see this conflict continue because I think the reporters rightfully feel they are the actual heart of the business.
Of course they are.
Right? You can get opinions anywhere.
I'd actually like to add a two-word argument that proves your case that you don't need to have op-ed columnists. And that two-word argument is Thomas Friedman.
Yes.
If you know who he is over in the audience, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, Google Matt Taibbi's piece about Thomas Friedman porn titles.
Great.
Yes.
That's going right into the book list. I'll tell you that right now.
No.
That's homework, okay, while we're going with right reply, I will continue to give you a right reply to the TV show that this is
which
come
I have
straight
not
off,
seen.
which you have not watched. So
Yes.
this will be interesting.
Yeah.
On today's show, Friday show, we talked at some length about statues, Gone with the Wind, and army bases.
Okay.
So go for it.
Yes. Okay. So
I actually didn't finish my argument, so I had some more.
Yeah. This is an issue that frequently just gets willfully misconstrued in two very important ways, right? The first is seeing this as something that is primarily about the Civil War. And there's this, there's this misunderstanding that all of these Civil War statues went up, during the Civil War or immediately after the Civil War to commemorate the dead. Now, did you mention on this show?
John mentioned this. They came 50 years later.
Exactly. This is not when they went. They went up in order to make a political statement, which was Jim Crow is here to stay. They would frequently go up outside courthouses as a way of saying the law is not going to protect you. And did he mention as well, like 450 of these statues came from one company that made cheap zinc statues.
He did not.
I think it was in Connecticut. It was either in Connecticut or Massachusetts. You could either get a Union statue or a Confederate statue. Yeah. Frequently, like, they mixed them up. It didn't matter because the whole point was just to put the statue there to keep the black population in line.
It sounds like the Pebblecrete of the 1910s.
Yeah. So this is not just about remembering the Civil War as some distant thing like, oh, yes, slavery was bad, but the valiant people on both sides, blah, blah, blah. No. It was part of an ongoing political project. Gone with the Wind was part of the same political project.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so and just to go back a little bit in history, immediately following the Civil War was this process known as Reconstruction, which was an attempt by the federal government to politically empower African Americans in the South by ensuring that they had the vote. Now, there were states in the South, like South Carolina, which were majority African American. And so you actually have majority African American legislatures. Now, Reconstruction met very violent resistance, right? This is where the first iteration of the Ku Klux Klan came from, as well as all kinds of other forms of resistance to try to make it as difficult as possible. And a lot of this involved trying to keep black people away from the ballot box by violence. For a while, the federal government, which was almost completely, I think it was completely Republican, or almost completely Republican for a couple of decades after the Civil War, for a while the federal government actually sent in the troops to try to, maintain order. But after a while, they really began to lose interest in this as a project and see it as very, very costly. The key moment came in the 1876 election, which you, of course, remember who this was between.
That's my favourite 1876 election.
Samuel Tilden and Rutherford B. Hayes.
Of course.
There were some shenanigans there regarding who actually won.
Yes. This one was the super close one.
Yes. Yeah. Basically, the deal that was reached, I mean, this is simplifying it a bit, but not that much. The deal that was reached was Rutherford B. Hayes, the Republican, gets to be the president as long as he puts an end to Reconstruction, which is what he did.
Yeah.
Pulls the federal government out. Then the states are basically back in the hands of white supremacists whose party was the Democratic Party. This is the beginning of Jim Crow.
Yeah.
And there's a bit of a struggle to implement Jim Crow legislation because you've got the 14th Amendment, which is supposed to stop stuff like that. But basically by about 1910, the rule of Jim Crow in the South was complete. This is what the statues are commemorating. Now, also at this point, I mean, it's the first 3 decades of the 20th century are in many ways sort of the peak of racist attitudes in the United States. So this is at the time that you have Calvin Coolidge signing the immigration laws that essentially made the Chinese Exclusion Acts the norm across the country. And you have something very similar to the White Australia Act in America, which is not only it's just white people, it's very specific kinds of white people, right? It's basically Northwestern Europe, and that's it. And also, this is when there's this increasing kind of romanticization of the South and, the lost cause. And there's also a belief, I mean, among a lot of Northern intellectuals that there needs to be reconciliation with the South. Yeah. The deep wounds of the Civil War haven't healed.
You don't want to be divisive, Dr. Dave.
Yeah, we need reconciliation. Yeah. And that's going to happen by basically embracing the racial politics of the South. At this point as well, by far, something like 2/3 of Democratic congressmen were from Southern states. That meant they basically exercised a veto over anything the Democratic Party did in Congress, which meant veto over pretty much anything that happened. This was known as the Southern veto. In the 1930s, this comes under threat because Franklin Roosevelt is winning such big electoral majorities that non-Southern Democrats now actually have the numbers to start doing things for themselves. It still takes them a very long time to move to civil rights. It's not until 1948 that you get the first Democratic Party civil rights platform. But the point being, 1939, when Gone with the Wind comes out, which is written by Margaret Mitchell, I think in 1929, 1939 is at this point where there's been basically the nationalisation of Southern racial politics for 30 years. There's signs on the horizon that could be under threat. Gone with the Wind is this glorification of the lost cause that is very much aimed at influencing the politics around the time, right? It's, it's part of that whole project of romanticization of the South. It depicts these northern carpetbaggers, including African-American carpetbaggers. And even though the movie is seen in many ways as a technical masterpiece and it's one of the earliest films in color, I've always, even with all the racism and all the racial context aside, I've always just thought it's shit.
Yeah, I don't like Gone with the Wind.
No, it goes for far too long.
Yeah.
None of the supposedly good characters are, in any way likable.
Yeah,
apart from
should be a podcast.
Apart from Hattie McDaniel's character. Yeah. The writing's terrible. The acting's just overdone. But I mean, partly because of how unique it was when it came out. It was one of these things that was both a blockbuster and a cult hit at the same time. People just love this. Like, I've got friends in the US who they've got family members who've got like entire rooms of their house dedicated to Gone with the Wind.
Well, it continues to be the highest grossing movie of all time.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Adjusted for inflation.
Yeah. Now, I do wonder if generational change will eventually oust it from its spot, and I don't know, Ratatouille 2 or something will take its place. But yeah, so Gone with the Wind, the point being, Gone with the Wind is not actually under any threat from HBO Max's
Definitely not.
decision to remove it for like 1 week until they can slap an introduction to it by some professor that people will fast forward through, unless they do what they did. I think Warner Brothers in the 2000s reissued a box set of their cartoons, some of which have some pretty off-color racist themes. And I think they had Whoopi Goldberg at the start saying, these views, not only are they not acceptable now, they weren't acceptable then. And they somehow made it so that you couldn't fast forward through it. Oh, I remember Mark Stein wrote an entire column complaining about the fact that he couldn't fast forward through Whoopi Goldberg, scolding him about racism so that he could get to his cartoons.
I made, not reference to Mark Stein, but I made the exact request on the show. I said, as long as that message you can fast forward through, that's fine.
Yeah.
That's me and Mark Stein.
Okay. So the first thing is, it's never just about the Civil War, right? It's about all of the politics that came after the Civil War, which were basically about undoing the gains of the Civil War and which remained in place in the South until 1965. But the second way in which this is always willfully misconstrued is, Trump and his allies, they know people hate being called racist, right? No one likes to be called racist. It's been a very long time since anyone willingly adopted the label racist. There was at one time, but to put it this way, people willingly called themselves white supremacists for a long time after they stopped calling themselves racists. Okay, so Trump is well aware of this. So he's got his line of attack lined up, which is, as he said today, we've got to confront bigotry and prejudice wherever we see it. But we're not going to do that. We're not going to heal the wounds by labeling decent people bigots and racists. Incorrect. Millions of decent people, bigots and racists, incorrect. So he's already priming people, right, to feel victimized. That, I'm going to get called a racist. And Trump is basically saying, I'm on the side of the people who get called racist, because we all know that's automatically unfair. Now, okay, there's a willful changing of the subject here. One of the things that, the George Floyd killing, subsequent protests, everything is revealed is there's actually more of an understanding now about racism as something structural.
Yes.
Right. So one of the really insidious things about the way that racism is understood is people think it is just a label meaning bad person. right? Moral failing. That to be a racist, it's because in your heart you hate every one of other races. This is why Fox News can always find some grandmother at a rally or something to interview saying, how can I be a racist? I love my black grandchildren as much as I love the rest of my grandchildren. Yeah. I can't possibly be... That is, most of the time, that is not what racism is actually about. But the fact that it always gets construed as just something that is purely a moral failing, right? That racism refers to somebody who's got all these bad thoughts in their heart. That means everyone always thinks, well, I'm not a racist and I hate this label racism because it could attach to me. Racism is structural. Okay, so racism is not just the officer kneeling on George Floyd's back until he died. Racism is the officer doing it in the presence of witnesses with the expectation that he wouldn't get punished for it. Okay, racism is not just the woman in Central Park calling the cops on a black birdwatcher. It's the fact that she says, I'm going to tell them that a black man is endangering my life. Right? Yeah. It's this understanding of these social structures which exist in shared mental models about how the world is, you know, about what black people are, about the kinds of threats that that black people pose. Yeah. And these statues, bases, gone with the wind, it's all part of the structure.
Okay.
It is all part of the sort of normalization of the Southern racial politics of the 19th century and the 20th century, right? It's a refusal to acknowledge the way that America was actually built. It's a refusal to acknowledge that the fact that African Americans are, you know, have all of these disparities with white Americans in terms of life chances. It's basically accepting that as somehow natural and normal and not the product of a very long political history where white supremacy was maintained by design. Okay, one example of this is Trump said, you know, he didn't want to change the names of military bases that were named after Confederate Civil War generals because he says, well, you want to call these racist institutions? These were the last thing that our brave men saw before they left for World War II to die for their country. It's like, actually, those institutions were racist. Those bases were segregated. Yes, the last thing African-American soldiers saw was a segregated base where they were probably living in substandard living quarters.
And I'm pretty sure when they went off to war, they weren't sniffing a little tear going, oh, I love the name of that base.
I love the Robert E. Lee Barracks. It was like a second home to me.
Yeah.
Right. So that actually is an example of the most institutional racism possible, but where Trump's trying to personalize it, trying to say, well, if you call that racist, you're essentially calling the troops racist. And this is what we're going to see all the way to the election and beyond, that any attempt to seriously deal with racism, and frankly, I don't think we're going to get one before the election, probably not afterwards either, but any serious attempt to deal with it, that will be painted as you're trying to call Americans racist. You know, and we're not racist because we're not bad people. Racism is not about being a good or bad person. It's not about a moral choice to be or not to be racist. Racism isn't about what's in your heart. It's about what comes out of your mouth. And what comes out of your mouth, that's not always something that is, completely just a product of you as a human being, right? Where we only have access to the language that we have grown up with, to the ideas that we have been socialized into. And, you know, that is what is reflected in what people say. So we have to get away from a conception of racism as it's just about bad, evil people. Now, yeah, there are a lot of bad, evil people who are racists out there, but you don't deal with racism in all of its manifestations and all of its power by just focusing on the people in white hoods.
Yeah, I've got a few things to pick up on here.
Yeah.
A bit of a run there. Okay, firstly, I couldn't agree more about. Let's leave aside Gone with the Wind and
Yes.
statues, but just the general point you're making there about structural racism versus bad guys.
Yes, yeah.
I think that I could not agree more, and I think that the overwhelming. I mean, it's not like I'm some expert, but from my point of view, the overwhelming problem in society at the moment is the structural kind of racism.
Yes, yeah.
Rather than dudes going around saying super racist stuff. They exist. Yes, they exist. But I'm betting that, to use the example of from the Wednesday show, I did a whole thing on criminal justice reform. I'm willing to bet that what affects black people a lot more than 9 black people being shot unarmed by police is the tens of thousands who go to jail for misdemeanors that wouldn't if they were white.
Yes.
And it's not because of super racist people throwing them in jail. It's because the system is set up
Yes.
so that it's easier for black people to go to jail for minor offences.
Yes.
And those small little issues add up to massive impacts on their lives. And I think my personal view is that is where it's at. It's the hardest stuff to solve.
Yes.
But that's also the biggest problems.
Yeah.
And I feel like there are people that I think one of the problems we face with racism in society is that a lot of different people use racism for different ends. Right. In that, and when I say use it, I mean talk about it. Like in that, you just described to what just then what I thought was a very sensible intellectual description of the problems of racism, right? Then there are people who are on Twitter and who just go, oh wow, you're wearing a kimono, you're racist. And then there's the people there are people who misuse it. There are people who are looking for cheap shots. There are people, and they all use the same word, and that word is racist. And you're absolutely right that people immediately arc up at the word racist. No one likes to be called a racist. And so my personal view is that the smart people should stop using the word racist because it always gets in the way. And that rather than using the word structural racism, we should just come up with some other word. We're smart. And to describe exactly the same thing.
White supremacy.
Whatever. I'm not saying you need to use a euphemism. I'm just saying as soon as you use the word racist, the discussion stops immediately, every time. And it becomes about, I'm not a racist. And it's not an attack. It's not an attack. It's a problem that needs to be solved.
White supremacist is actually a more accurate description of what we're talking about.
Sure. Anyway,
because it's not generic racial prejudice. It's, it's a...
And that's neither here nor there for Gone with the Wind, but just as a general thing, I always think whenever I see someone on TV who's intelligent, who's talking about this problem, they start using the word racist, I think you've just lost your whole audience. Just use a different fucking word. That's just white
supremacist. It's a perfectly good.
There we go. But anyway, that's just a little aside. I think an interesting thing when we're getting back to the Gone with the Wind type stuff.
Yes.
An interesting I didn't know the thing about the propaganda, about the 1930s propaganda I knew it was gentle to slavery, but I didn't see it in the context that you just described.
Yes.
I didn't know about that. If you should record the history warning for people for HBO. That would be useful. Because I was thinking before, I don't need HBO to teach me about history, but I do need Dr. Dave to teach me about history. So you should record that. But anyway, I feel like there's a lot of works that are the result of propaganda that aren't a problem. You can often go to Shakespeare for these kinds of things. There's plenty of Shakespeare that was propaganda for the royal family and so forth. But you watch it now and it doesn't affect us. And the reason why is because we're completely divorced from that context. Yes. It means nothing to us. Right? And so we
you really showed those Puritans.
Exactly.
Malvolio with his yellow stockings.
Yeah.
Got him!
And now we're definitely not completely divorced from the Gone with the Wind era.
We are certainly not.
But I do feel that people who watch it now would approach it with a different set of preconceptions to what people in the 30s and people in the 20s
Right.
would have watched it. And I'll give you an example. This is an elegant example, but it's just true. So that's what I'll give it. A week ago, I happened to be watching the Paul Hogan show because I was just wasting time.
Oh, wow.
And that's quite a show. I don't know if you've watched the Paul Hogan show recently.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, I saw a few episodes.
That's a very, very sexist show.
Yes.
It has to be said. And like, yeah, the world has changed a fair bit since then.
Yes.
But not completely. And it was interesting. When I found myself while watching it going, man, you know what I'm like. I'm not really a cancel kind of a guy, but I was like, let's cancel the 80s. Someone's got to pay for this. This is awful.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's funny how when you divorce someone just a little bit from an era, even if it's not a complete. I mean, I was alive in the 80s. I watched the Paul Hogan show when it was out the first time. Didn't find it funny then either, but I didn't realize quite how sexist it was until I watched it the second time round. And it was revealing to me of how just a slight change of context and a slight tweak makes a very, very very large difference to how you interpret it. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that the power and the effectiveness that Gone with the Wind may have once had.
Yes.
Once again, this is why I think the warning thing is a great idea, and the little history thing is a great idea, and that's one of the reasons why that helps set it in context. And so personally, I actually think the answer they've come up with is a good one. But I also think that we shouldn't automatically assume that because something is, I'm just going to use the word racist, racist or terrible from the time it was made, that necessarily people will fall for it in exactly the same way again when they watch it 80 years later or whatever. You know, And so we'll just flag that, because something which I was just thinking is that we are going through a period now of quite rapidly changing social mores in society. And what that means is that this is not going to be, Gone with the Wind is not going to be the last movie that gets out of date. No. And I expect in 20 or 30 years' time, pretty much everything made before 1990 is going to be out of date. Like it's going to, because our mores are changing fast, and they're not going to stop changing fast, I suspect. And so I'm not going, oh no, we can't watch Breakfast at Tiffany's anymore. What a loss. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that I feel like that this is going to be an increasing problem unless we work out a way to deal with it. And I personally think that, number one, not freaking out is a good way to start. But secondly, I think when you do have something that we think is genuinely problematic, that's the way to deal with it. I think that's a good way. But anyway, just throw that out there because I didn't say that on the show.
By the way, speaking of movies,
yes,
can you guess which president had named Gone with the Wind as his favorite ever movie?
Barack Obama?
No. Obama's The Godfather and Godfather Part 2. So he likes long movies.
I'm going to guess that it was LBJ.
No, it was not LBJ. LBJ's favourite is The Searchers.
Oh, okay.
John Wayne's epic.
Okay, whose favourite was it?
Jimmy Carter's.
Jimmy Carter!
Jimmy Carter, when it came out, they gave everyone the day off school, and I think actually made them go to see it. So that gives you a bit of an idea of the politics that were involved. Some other notable ones. Woodrow Wilson's, there's a lot of historical controversy about this. Woodrow Wilson's favourite movie was reportedly Birth of a Nation. Now, admittedly,
that's the Nazi one.
No, it's not Nazi. That is just a full-blown piece of Klan propaganda. Unfortunately, though, one of the very first actual full-length motion pictures in the United States. So it's kind of got this landmark status, but also just incredibly racist. Makes Gone with the Wind look like Paw Patrol. And...
don't get me started on Paw Patrol. That definitely is a warning.
Yeah. But yeah, and there were always these rumors that Woodrow Wilson, when it was first promoted, because Woodrow Wilson was president at the time when it came out in 1915, And they promoted it with this quote from Woodrow Wilson. It looks like it was writ with lightning.
Okay, so to be fair, it was his favourite movie because it was the only movie.
Well, even at the time, Woodrow Wilson, who was one of the most racist presidents the US ever had, like resegregated things that were desegregating, but he was part of this whole nationalisation of Southern politics. He was like, I never said that. That was written by my friend who happened to direct the movie, but I never said that. And I kind of believe him because I am familiar with Woodrow Wilson's written work, such as his classic book, Congressional Government, from the 1880s, where he advocated the US having actually a British-style system of government.
Yeah.
Woodrow Wilson never said anything as concise as writ with lightning.
Sure.
But other notable presidential movies.
What's Trump's favourite movie, do you know?
That wasn't listed in the article that I wrote. I've heard it rumoured that it's Patton, which is also Richard Nixon's favourite.
That's right, I have heard that before as well.
Favourite movie? Yeah. I suspect it's actually Bloodsport, but he makes a big deal out of Patton.
Yeah.
Bill Clinton and Dwight Eisenhower both had the same favourite movie, High Noon.
Yeah.
With Gary Cooper. So we've got strong Western representation. George W. Bush's favourite movie, Field of Dreams.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Oh, no. No, Georgie, what are you doing?
Build it and they will come.
Oh, no. Oh, you can just imagine it though, can't you?
Oh, you totally imagine it.
Yes, you can.
How many times do you reckon he watched that? But also, this article I read said Bill Clinton actually took 2 days off work as president to fulfill his ambition of watching every Police Academy movie.
You don't need 2 days to do that.
Yeah.
That's no commitment at all. Just go straight through.
Maybe
Bill.
that was the cover story for what he was actually doing.
Sure.
Okay,
we should move on. Let's get on to the stuff which wasn't from Friday's show. Okay, protests. First of all, there's something which we haven't covered in the protest coverage of our regular Wednesday Friday show, which demands covering, and that is the Antifa provocateur.
Oh, yes.
the tweet from Trump way back a week ago, which was that, remember that poor 75-year-old guy who was knocked over by the police. His head was bleeding everywhere. It made this awful sound. Trump tweeted out, Buffalo protester shoved by police could be an Antifa provocateur. 75-year-old Martin Gugino was pushed away after appearing to scan police communications in order to black out the equipment. One American News Network. I watched. He fell harder than was pushed. Was aiming scanner. Could be a setup. Okay, all right.
This is like such a Facebook grandpa thing to think that a mobile phone is this like police radio disrupting technology.
I know. Okay, let me just break this down a little bit.
Yes. Break it down for us.
There's a lot to be broken down.
Have you watched that video over and over again, like the Zapruder film?
I not only have I watched it over and over again, I watched the One America News Network report that inspired this over and over again. And it's some watching. Have you seen it?
No. I cannot ever bring myself to watch OAN.
There's a guy, I'm going to play a bit of it just for you.
Don't. So play it for the peppers afterwards. Just leave me out of this.
I want you to hear this guy's voice.
Okay.
Because it really adds to it. It really does. Okay. All right. So first of all, now let's just read that again, just a bit of it. Actually, no, I'll tell you. Let me just play a bit of the One American News Network report first, and then I'll talk about it. Because this is what inspired Trump, okay?
Yeah.
So
was this one of his periods where he was grumpy with Fox News because of a bad poll or something? So, like, only One American News this week.
I think he was probably angry with Fox News that they didn't cover this.
Newly released videos appear to show Gugino using a police tracker on his phone, trying to scan police communications during the protest. The tactic known as skimming is an old trick used by Antifa to locate police officers and plan violent activities bypassing the police response. In addition, the 75-year-old, who's been referred to as an agitator, was supposedly using the technology to black out police communications.
Okay, so he
Blacking
actually
out police.
he actually sounds like a spam YouTube clip.
It does. It really does.
It's
yes.
amazing. Yeah, and this guy,
Yeah.
and this guy, you said during the clip they won't hear that because they, they were watching the clip. Yes, he's still reporting
For Sputnik.
for Sputnik, which is a Russian propaganda channel. So it's just all comedy.
Yeah.
Anyway, that clip then, I'm not sure if you noticed, but he actually said that this guy was doing two contradictory things. He was trying to scan police communications to locate police officers and bypass their response, and he was trying to black out police communications, which is, they are two entirely contradictory things.
CHAZ.
And rather than trying to choose one, he just said he's doing both.
Got him.
Got him! But I just love that they couldn't be bothered to even pick a conspiracy. Just throw shit out there.
That internal contradiction clearly doesn't bother the man either.
Okay, but let's go through what is supposedly happening. Let's take option one. He's trying to scan communications. Okay, if he's trying to scan communications, he can just do it from home. It's a scanner.
Yeah.
Like, you don't need to be waving it inches away from their phones that they're not using. Secondly, why would he need to scan communications to locate police officers? They're everywhere. This is America during the protests. Wherever you look, there is a police officer shooting pepper spray at a reporter. You don't need to try. And why would you try and scan two police officers?
Look, Chaz, this is why I say marketplace of ideas, it's bullshit.
Yeah,
right?
Okay, all right. Well, just a few more.
Trump wasn't like, whoa, the marketplace of ideas is pricing that news article pretty high.
Don't deprive me of my goddims, because I've got many more. Blacking out police communications. That was option number 2, all right? Now, if he had a frequency jammer, he could use it from 100 feet away.
Right.
And they don't look like that anyway. And why is he trying to do that? Why is he trying to black out the communications of 2 police officers when they're surrounded by hundreds of other police officers? It doesn't make... Anyway, I will move on.
Yes.
That's the important thing. This is actually going somewhere.
Okay.
The other thing is that, just before I get to where this is going, is that this is all surrounding... The reason Trump's tweeting this out is not because he believes... He doesn't even understand what this theory is, because no one can, because it makes no sense.
No.
But it's the word Antifa. That's what this is about.
Yes.
It's about getting the word Antifa out there,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And his evidence for why this guy is Antifa
Yes.
is because there was a video that this YouTube spam guy cited, where some Black Lives Matter guy in some video somewhere was talking about him and said, I think he's looking to get punched in the face. That's what this is. That was their evidence.
That's their evidence.
Also, on his blogger profile, he cites that he's been arrested 4 times, which, by the way, let me tell you, that's amateur effort.
Yeah, how many times have you been arrested?
At least 6. I lose count. but anyway, he's not even trying. But that's those same web pages that he has his blogger profile on. There's the total evidence, by the way. That he's Antifa. That is it. But those same web pages. That
No one who has a blogger profile is any kind of subversive mastermind.
And people who walk up to the police without masks and start chatting to them. That's not very Antifa. They're usually head-butting windows. They're not chatting to the police without masks. And they're not 75 years old.
No.
When do you see Antifa go 75 years old? Anyway, but on his webpage, he says that the organizations he's a part of, Push Buffalo, Western New York Peace Center, and the Catholic Worker Movement. They're 3 peace organizations. Yeah. Like, so it's just, unless he's undercover Antifa, it just makes no sense at all. But anyway, he got that out there, the Antifa thing.
Yeah.
And just before I get to the point, I will play one more clip.
Just before you get to the point.
Yeah, I will play one more clip, just because this makes me a little bit annoyed. So I want to. What you need at times like this, you need to get self-righteous, and there's no one who's better at getting self-righteous than your friend of mine, Andrew Cuomo.
Oh,
so here we go. Because he noticed the fact that this guy who's pushed himself back harder than he was pushed or whatever. This guy's then thrown himself onto the ground, and Andrew Cuomo makes the obvious point.
He fell harder than he was pushed. In the video, you see him pushed, and you see a 75-year-old man fall backwards and hit his head on the pavement. What does that even mean? Fell harder than he was pushed. What do you think it was? It was staged? Do you think the blood coming out of his head was staged? Is that what you're saying? You saw his head hit the pavement. You see blood on the pavement.
He's good at high dungeon, isn't he?
He is.
He really is good. That's a real gift. But yeah,
that actually
but he's right.
Yeah. Speaking of the Zapruder film, that actually did have a bit of a climactic feel to JFK.
That clip there.
Yeah. Back and to the left.
I'm going to use
back and to the left.
I'll use that clip in our movie that's under 90 minutes long. Okay, but this is where it's going. Okay,
Yes.
Where this is going is this. Last week, a husband, a wife, a daughter, and a grandma were stopping to buy some camping supplies on the way to camping, okay?
Yep.
Now, confronted by apparently...
this is in Washington State, right?
They were confronted by apparently 7 or 8 carloads of people who repeatedly asked them if they were Antifa.
Right.
They said, no, we're not Antifa.
That's like Antifa's really going to say, yes, we're Antifa.
But also,
you found us.
Also, Antifa don't go camping in the bush
No.
with their grandmother. Why do these people think that 75-year-olds are in Antifa all of a sudden? Anyway, they then drove their bus around multiple vehicles to get away. They got back on the road. They're driving away. And all of a sudden, they're being followed by 4 cars, 2 of which had semi-automatic rifles in them. They reached their destination and set up a tent. I don't know why you do that if you've been followed by cars and rifles, but they did.
Yep.
Then they start hearing gunshots and power saws. That's not a good sign.
No.
So they decide maybe we should leave after all. So they get in their car, they hop in their car, they're driving home. Oh, no, they're not driving anywhere because someone felled trees across the road, preventing their exit. So they were then trapped. They ended up being saved by 4 high schoolers who just happened upon them and chainsawed the trees and then called the police for them.
Hang on. High schoolers carrying chainsaws.
Well,
maybe it's Washington State.
Those high schoolers probably were Antifa. That's why they had chainsaws. But anyway, I mean, that's legitimately the start of a horror movie.
Yeah, it
like
is.
when you're trapped in the woods, you go walk off to a cabin.
Yeah.
Do
we know anything about why these guys thought that they
No,
were Antifa?
no, we don't know. They've been arrested, but we don't know. We don't know. My point is the reason why this is serious.
Yes.
Like all this, I took this big run up on this.
Yeah, no, it's
because that's what ends up happening.
absolutely. I completely
People
agree.
end up getting hurt and maybe killed.
Yes.
Because everyone is paranoid about this bullshit.
Yes.
Because Trump is trying to get out of a bad fix he's in the polls at the moment with this George Floyd thing. So so that's why I brought it up, and I just said that, and that is the serious side of all this. So I'll just throw it out there.
By the way, this is another example of how Trump is not some political mastermind.
Well, no, that wasn't very intelligent.
No. I'm going to take the side against the 75-year-old grandpa who's been pushed over and is bleeding. I mean, that's Kizar Khan type territory. Yeah. He throws a lot of stuff out there and sometimes it sticks.
Hey, on that note, by the way, it's as a little aside.
Yeah.
The something I was reading about this week is about Trump seems to be moving away from saying the kinds of things that you would expect him to say to try and win over black support.
Yes.
And there was a period there, we talked about it at the time, where he was making a concerted effort to win the black vote. Because he has some credits on his side. He's got the criminal justice, the First Step Act that he signed and he kind of pushed. 2 years ago.
His team hoped that he could raise his share of the black vote from about 8% to 10 or 12%, which at the margins could be incredibly important in places like North Carolina.
Well, according to inverted commas sources, whether they might be right or not,
Yes.
when you say his team, what you mean is Jared Kushner. Apparently,
yes.
this is Jared Kushner's little obsession.
Yes.
That Trump needs to. That it'll be oh so easy for Trump to win 4 or 6% more of the black vote. He'd still get destroyed in the black vote, but that 4 or 6% would make potentially the difference in the election.
the margins
and that he should try and Kushner's apparently been trying to get him to reach out from the whole time. Kushner was the one who pushed the First Step Act, and Kushner's been trying to get him to make this race speech, although it's written by Stephen Miller. That might be a mistake.
Yes.
and that Trump recently is a bit disconcerted by his polling, and so he's said, "Yeah, fuck you, Jared. I'll do it my way," and that's why he's doing the law and order yelling on Twitter over and over again, because that's not what Jared Kushner wants him to do.
No.
I just want to make one point about that, though. And when you're saying Trump's not a mastermind, I was looking at the New York Times upshot. They averaged out some polls over the last 4 months, compared 2 months to 2 months, March, April to May, June, and then compared that to 2016.
Yeah.
Let me just read out a couple of numbers quickly here. All right, so in 2016, there was a 5-point lead. This is just before the election. A 5-point lead to the Democrats. In March, April, there was a 6-point lead to Biden. In May, June, there was a 10-point lead to Biden. Okay, so we know that's been happening. But let's look at the demographics, because this is kind of interesting. 18 to 22s went from 16 points up to 22 points up. The 65s, the seniors went from 10 points up to 7 points up. That gap's actually been closing. Although having said that, back in 2016, they were 5 points down.
Yes.
So that's still a big jump up.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that in the last 2 months, Trump's closed that gap a little bit. Men have gone nowhere, from 8 points to Trump to 6 points to Trump. That's a small closing the gap for Biden, but not much. And then women have opened up that gap. They've gone from 19 points up to 25 points up, the Democrats. And Hillary was 14 points up.
Yes. Yeah.
So that is a big one right there. White college has gone from 16 points up to 20 points up. Hillary was 12 points up.
Yes.
So we can see the Democrats. So Biden has really consolidated the gains that Hillary had made.
Yeah.
And this is an interesting one, which I mentioned vaguely on the show. White non-college has gone from 31 points to Trump to 21 points to Trump. Trump's lost 10 points of his base there in the last 2 months. And against Hillary, he won that by 29 points. So in that case, Biden's consolidated Hillary's gains and also eaten away at Trump's strength. But non-white has gone from 45 points up to Biden to 46 points up to Biden, even with all this protest stuff.
Yeah.
And Hillary was ahead by 50 points. So what that tells me is that Jared Kushner is right. There is an opportunity there for Trump. Even now, there is an opportunity for Trump. Although he might have pissed it away in the last week or so. But the fact is, Jared Kushner is absolutely spot on. There was an opportunity there, and he, in my view, is nuts to have turned his back on it recently. Hey, we acknowledge Jared Kushner was right?
Let me talk about something else.
One day.
Well, no, but it's actually not a matter of like, oh, Jared Kushner's right. What a genius. People have been saying for decades.
I didn't say he's a genius. I just want to hear you say Jared Kushner was right.
The Republican Party should have more of an outreach to non-white people.
I know. I'm not saying this is Einstein stuff.
Anyway, but you and Melina were talking about this concept of bigger and smaller halves in the last podcast. Now, for those of you not familiar with the historical reference that's being made there, this was Pat Buchanan in 1971 when he was Nixon's, back then, very young speechwriter. And he said, if we cut Democrats and the country in half, in my view, we'll get the bigger half.
Yes.
So that's that's where the famous phrase comes from.
And at the time he was right, but now he's wrong.
At the time he was, well, I think Trump just seems to keep going after the smaller half. And the fact that he won by going after the smaller half in 2016, is why I think he is going back to this strategy.
Yeah, look, I think it's fair.
Yeah.
On protest type stuff,
yes.
I am about a day behind my reading, so
Right.
I'm aware that there is something out there called the CHAZ.
The CHAZ. Yes.
I'm very anxious to know about the CHAZ.
So this is in Seattle. So
Yes.
CHAZ stands for Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. There's actually already a very informative Wikipedia page about this. Yeah, like if you want to know about this, just read the
Well,
Wikipedia.
I do want to know about the CHAZ.
Read the Wikipedia page. So the CHAZ comes from a pitched battle that took place between protesters and police. I think it was that weekend where everything was kicking off around the country, where the police eventually retreated. They actually abandoned I think it's called the Southeast Precinct station.
Was that because things got really hairy, or were they just trying to avoid conflict?
It was a de-escalation move.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, things had got pretty hairy. And so the mayor, Jennifer Durkin, has said, I think it's Jennifer Durkin, has said, this is about de-escalation, and they're sort of in the process of working out what's going to happen. The police chief, unsurprisingly, is pretty eager to get back in there.
Yes.
The mayor, says no, this needs to de-escalate. Okay, so what has happened in the CHAZ? So it's this 6-block zone where they don't want any cops to come, where they've got things like a store with free hand sanitizer and other supplies. There's a lot of public art, murals, free concerts, stuff like that. Just to give you an idea of what Capitol Hill is as a neighborhood, it is basically, it's your classic former working class neighborhood that then becomes a cheap bohemian neighborhood, that then becomes an expensive bohemian neighborhood, and is now it's had the shit gentrified out of it. Like, think Paddington in Sydney, think Prahran, am I pronouncing it correctly? Prahran in Melbourne, West End of Brisbane, Norwood in Adelaide, Fremantle, and I don't know what the Tasmanian equivalent is.
But that was a good effort.
To
Well
all
done.
of our Tasmanian listeners.
And sorry to our Vietnamese listeners. We've been following you as well. Don't worry.
So
We've got a few of them.
oh, really?
We really do.
Oh,
Yeah.
we're losing Myanmar.
Yeah, Myanmar's gone off the map.
Oh, well,
Disappointing. They're going.
we'll have to think about how to get them back. But anyway, so this is the sort of neighborhood it is, right? It is absolutely the kind of place where you could just not have cops for days and just have what is basically a big street festival going on without any serious actual disruption to public order, right? And this is what is happening. So when Ted Cruz says this is threatening people's lives, like, no. He's like, you know how much this is not threatening people's lives?
How much?
The city is still picking up trash
Yes.
in the CHAZ. The police have said we will answer 911 calls from inside the CHAZ.
Yeah.
Right. So this is actually, it's kind of got the cooperation of the city. There's a delicate negotiation going on here. Now,
So it's kind of like when kids camp in their parents' backyard. They pitch a tent, they pull out the torch.
a little bit more idealistic than that. But, and so I suppose there have been some things that people have found alarming, like I think the Puget Sound John Brown gun club. So John Brown gun clubs are these anarchist gun clubs, right, who, they're anarchists, but at some point they basically agree with the right about the importance of carrying guns around. So there apparently they've been roaming around the neighborhood. There was a video streamed of a rapper whose name I've forgotten.
That's Raz Simone, isn't it?
Yes, Raz Simone, who's been described as the warlord of the CHAZ.
Yeah.
Although he disclaims the title warlord.
I wonder why.
As you would. There was apparently a streamed video of him confronting a tagger with a gun or something. So, not entirely smooth sailing. I lived in Seattle for 6 months. Right. I know the anarchist culture up there is a little bit weird. Like, there's this fantastic bookshop that's in, I think it's in Pike Place. I can't remember what it's called. But one of their prize items is a copy of one of Rush Limbaugh's books that is just riddled with bullet holes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's in a glass case.
It's a very special kind of hippie.
Yeah, so someone's just taken it out and shot it, apparently with not a semi-automatic, with an actual, like, automatic weapon. That was the place I remember. I was last there in 2014, and there's this sign there saying "All welcome except anyone wearing Google Glass." If you are wearing that fucking fascist tool, you will be told to leave immediately.
Look, I'm starting to see their point of view.
Yeah. So it's a funny little subculture up there. Polyamory is a very big part of it.
So where is this going? Where's the CHAZ going? Is
the CHAZ
is the new
going?
country? Should I move to the CHAZ?
Well, they do say like you're now leaving the United States.
I'm sure they say that now.
You're entering the CHAZ. But anyway, so the predictable overreaction to this from Trump has been to say, this is not a game.
Okay.
To say to the mayor, like, this is not a game. If you don't put an end to this, I will. Now, given the military has basically already made it very clear that they're not listening to Trump on the whole, send the troops into the states thing, let alone the cities.
Is there a bit of Amsterdam about this? Have you seen that
Yeah,
line in Series 3? Yeah, like where it's...
This is way more bourgeois than Amsterdam.
Yeah, sure.
Although, given that weed's been legal in Washington State since 2014.
Just for those who don't know, in the Y, there was a bit where Baltimore overrun with drugs and crime, and so they experimented with sealing off a block and saying, okay, there's certain things you can't do, but otherwise go for it.
Yeah,
and
they have not turned the Paddington of Seattle into Amsterdam. Right. But Trump's like, this is not a game. You put a stop to this or I will. To which Jennifer Durkin replied, go back to your bunker.
Poor old Trump. He's never going to live that bunker down.
No, he never will.
And like we always say, I hate the childish to and fro. But,
yes, but
you just can't help but smile a little bit.
No,
when you see a bully getting bullied, you just go, oh,
yeah.
But I just wish they wouldn't. Mature me is stepping in on immature me and saying, no, stop it.
Yes. But anyway, that's the story of the CHAZ.
Okay, all right.
Zone.
Thank you for briefing me on the CHAZ. I'm just looking at time. Okay, all right. Okay, I should explain one thing, which is a couple of weeks old. So that's why I should explain before it gets too old. And that is on this, them changing the charges on Chauvin.
Right, yes.
Yeah, I've never explained that either on either the TV or here, and I should, because if for people who care about the law and for people who have some kind of consistency, there is a problem here, which is that all right, they changed it from third degree murder, homicide, to second degree homicide, and you know, I talked about at the time the problem for that was that second degree homicide, you're supposed to intentionally be trying to kill him. So when Chauvin is kneeling on his neck, they need to prove that at the time he was thinking, I want this man to die. Right. Not I'm being a bastard and whatever and he died, who cares? Yeah. No, I want this man to die. And that's a hard thing to prove, that state of mind. Yeah. Unless he says it or something like that. But there is a different kind there is one loophole for second degree murder, which is what most legal, they haven't announced what they're going to do, but this is what most legal writers seem to think they are trying to do. Yeah. And that is that if there is one way you can get second degree murder, if there's what they call a felony murder, where if you commit a felony in the process of committing the murder, you don't need to be intentionally trying to murder them to get second degree murder. Okay. Now, the way that normally works is the predicate felony, the felony which is causing the murder, is supposed to be different to the murder. So if I punch you and then you die of that punch, you can't go, punching's assault and he died, so you commit assault and then there's a murder, because obviously every act that ends up with a murder is probably going to be some kind of assault of some kind. Yep. And in most cases, in almost every state, that is indeed the case. You need to have a separate act. Say you set fire to a place which kills someone. Yeah. There's arson is separate from the murder of that person dying in the fire. Right, okay. You see what I mean? Yep. Okay. Minnesota is just about the only state that doesn't have that particular rule. Okay. It's a loophole. And so they are going for that. They're doing precisely that. They're saying they're saying that, well, it appears that they're saying, yes, he committed third-degree assault, which is a very low felony. And since that person died during third-degree assault, that's felony murder, second-degree murder.
Right.
So that's basically leapfrogging a 5-year sentence into a 40-year sentence through a loophole in the law. Now, that is exactly the kind of thing that criminal justice campaigners would normally kill themselves over. They just go, that is just completely unacceptable. That is corruption. That is all the rest of it. That is that, and ironically, they are using this extremely dodgy method to try and get a guy who they feel is taking the law into his own hands.
Right.
In a very similar kind of breaking all the rules kind of a way.
Yeah.
And so it depends how consistent you want to be, like whether you cheer this on or not. And personally, I continue to wish they'd gone for third-degree murder, because that is actually what it is in the book as far as I can see. I also think it's safer, but because there's like, you just don't know how the judge will respond to this.
Right.
But but anyway, that's what they're doing. That's what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
And so so you can draw your own conclusions about that. Might move off protests. We've already started. We lifted the lid on 2020. There was that vote in Georgia the other day, which is a complete mess.
Yes.
Because we've been talking about this forever, and this the potential for the voting to be a mess. We've seen it in action now. Do you have any idea what was going on there? Is this something we should be worried about?
It is something that we should be worried about. And there's a Twitter thread that I really recommend, which I believe I have sent you the link.
You have. I'll put it up.
Yes. So by a reporter with a major news affiliate in Atlanta, just unpacking all of the things that went wrong. What's worrying about it is how many different things go wrong under pressure. So basically the pressure of the pandemic means there's going to be less training for poll workers. There are going to be fewer poll workers showing up. It means you lose all kinds of poll places, right? Because places that you were going to use as polling places, for some reason they've either got to, so in some cases it would have been a nursing home was going to be used as a polling place. Nope, that has to stay as a nursing home. You can't turn that into a polling place. But then, so there's the specific pressure of the pandemic is then pushing down on a structure which has just been suffering from years and years of underfunding, right? So there's absolutely no margin for error at all. And all of a sudden, they're having to deal with 100 times as many absentee ballot requests as they've ever had before.
Yeah.
So thousands of them just never got dealt with at all. They didn't have the personnel. They wouldn't have had the personnel to do it under normal circumstances, and they had a lot of people turning up. So what ended up happening was a lot of people who would have voted absentee instead had to turn up to a polling place.
And they weren't expecting that.
Yep. Some of the polling places didn't even open or didn't open on time because they didn't have poll workers. Some of the polling places were no longer polling places because of some of these problems. Then on top of that, there's the shiny new voting machines.
Yes.
That the state had just purchased.
Which it was important that they do purchase it because Georgia didn't used to have a paper trail and now they do.
Right.
Yeah. So anyway, go on.
Yeah. So apparently there were power grid problems that day. So a lot of the voting machines just didn't even power up. Poll workers weren't trained in how to use them. So there were all kinds of problems with that as well. I do want to mention at this point, now this is not a problem unique to Georgia. Many, many states have what's known as balanced budget amendments.
Yes.
Okay.
I think almost every state. I think it's maybe one that doesn't. I think it's
Is it really only one?
I think it's only one. I'll look it up while you're talking.
Yeah. These are one of the worst things in politics in the United States because this basically means it's a constitutional requirement that you can't ever go into debt.
Yep.
And so it basically means most states are in a permanent condition of austerity, right? You're not going to use economic cycles in the way that a national government can. You're not going to use
every state other than Vermont.
Wow.
Yeah.
Not going to use these states have very good credit ratings in most cases, but no point to it. And so they're always looking for things to cut.
Yep.
That includes funding to cities. Cities themselves are always looking for things to cut because they've got to spend, 36% of their budget on the super militarized Robocop force. And, it's something like this. This is your classic item that they'll just, okay, we used to have 8 poll workers. We'll reduce that to 6. We'll reduce that to 4. And then when there's pressure on, you suddenly get a situation where, a building that we thought was a polling place has actually been sold to a developer and no longer exists.
Yes.
It's a pile of rubble. All of these factors, all of this chaos amounts to very long lines on polling day during a pandemic. And that, there are a lot of reports of people just leaving.
Of course.
Leaving in disgust. Now, okay, this is a relatively low stakes election that we're talking. We're talking about a primary where the presidential results have already been decided.
But of course, it'll be worse on the general election.
Yeah. So this is at a point where, election specialists say when you have this level of discouragement, that is effectively voter suppression, right? And voter suppression can just happen by neglect. So Fulton County, which is Atlanta, is putting all of the blame on the state election commission because they ultimately, I think I've got the name of the body wrong there, but the state body that oversees. This, by the way, this body has a very dodgy history. This, of course, Brian Kemp, the current governor, was the Secretary of State overseeing an election that he was running in where there were all kinds of this level of discouragement. Fulton County is a majority black area. There were a lot of reports that you didn't have the same problems in majority white areas, even areas that were very close by. So unfortunately, I think this is a preview of a lot of what we're going to see, especially in southern states that have any possibility of breaking against Trump in the election.
I should just explain for people when you're talking about voter suppression.
Yeah.
And you're saying, it doesn't even have to be intentional because it's been neglectful. The reason why this has a partisan edge to it, even at the point of, even when it's neglectful, is because there are many more voters in usually less well-resourced areas in cities.
Yes.
And they happen to be Democrat voters. And so even if someone isn't trying to tip the scales, then it just, if the system is under pressure, it will affect the Democrat voters more than the Republican voters in the rural areas, generally speaking. So that there is that. I'll just talk about one other thing about when you're talking about the pandemic putting pressure on the system.
Yes.
I've got a stat nugget about that. 58% of the election poll workers in Georgia in 2018 were over 60.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
27% were over 70.
Right.
And I don't think it was any different in any other state. They tend to be very, very old.
No, this is how it works.
And what that means...
Old people are the backbone of the electoral system.
Yeah, and so that means, you got to find other people, and then you have to train other people.
Yes.
So that's going to be an issue. That is almost certainly going to be an issue in the election. They need to train a whole new workforce because they can't get 70-year-olds doing this shit.
No, they can't.
Not in the middle of COVID.
No.
Second thing, I was quite coincidentally, this is quite a coincidence that you brought up the balanced budget amendments, because somewhere else I was going to go in a completely different area was about in terms of the COVID packages that are floating around. I was going to talk about funding states, and I was going to give a classic example of what the problem is if you don't fund states properly.
Yes.
If you just go, they should just tighten their belts. They should stop being such spendthrifts. I should, before I tell this story, just to flesh out what you were saying before about the balanced budget amendment. If you have, just to explain to people, when you have a balanced budget, every time there's a recession, the taxes go down because more people are unemployed, And more people require unemployment benefits, so you have to pay more. And usually more people require, when you're unemployed, Medicaid, which is healthcare for the poor, so you have to pay more.
Which is provided through the states.
Exactly. So you take in less money if you're a state and you pay out more money. Now, they try and tighten their belts wherever they can and they get very stingy, but nevertheless, it plays havoc with their budgets. A lot of these balanced budget amendments, you don't have to be balanced every single year. You can balance over 2 or 3 years. And so what they end up doing is they end up basically pushing further and further along. They're cutting all the time. And it takes 7 or 8 years to come out of a recession if you're a state because of these balanced budget measures. And this is exactly what happened under Obama for the basically the entire the whole 6 years after the recession was over under Obama, the states were digging out of a hole.
Yes.
They never got back into a surplus under Obama. They got into a surplus for the first time under Trump.
Yeah.
And this is about to happen again.
Yes.
We're about to have another 6 years of this.
By the way, just going back to the subject of terrible metaphors, one of the most pernicious is the idea that, a government is like a household.
Yes.
Yeah. You got to live within your means, balance budget. No, a government is nothing like a household.
If you're a state, it is because they've got these stupid balanced budget amendments.
Yes,
But if you're the federal government, it's not.
Forcing you to act, like a household.
Yeah.
Yes.
Anyway, so it hurts everyone, these balanced budget amendments. They're not very sensible. But
by the way, if you want to know more about how metaphors affect our mental structures very deeply, George Lakoff is your man, and his books Metaphors We Live By and Women, Fire and Dangerous Things, which I think are from 1985 and 1984.
The hand of God is all over that.
Okay.
I'm scribbling it down. Okay, so this is the story I was going to tell you.
Yes.
I want to give you a case study of how these balanced budgets work with COVID.
Oh, God.
All right. So
this is going to be depressing.
This is going to be
Prepare to be depressed, Peppers.
All right. All right. Teacher pay hikes.
Yes.
You will recall teachers had lots of strikes a couple of years ago.
Yes.
There was a huge round of strikes.
Even in areas where they weren't allowed to strike. It was a pretty courageous industrial action.
And the reason for that was because they hadn't had any raises. In fact, in some cases, they had pay cuts in the previous 8 years because of what we just described, because they were just trying to penny pinch the states wherever they could. And usually it was from education. And so the teachers were desperate for some pay hikes. A couple of states got some pay hikes. A number of states put forward pay hikes for the coming years.
Yes.
They've been shelved. Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, Hawaii, they're all shelving the pay rises they'd promised a year or two ago because of COVID. But here's the thing. It's not just about their pay, because the states don't just pay for their wages, they also pay for their pensions.
Yes.
And those pensions, they're quite large. $60 billion out of the $320 billion spent on teachers' pay is spent on their pensions.
Yes.
But that, while it sounds like a lot, that's not nearly enough, because the unfunded liabilities have gone from $19 billion in 2001 to $642 billion in 2018.
Yeah.
The reason they've gone up like that is because in this period we were talking about, while people were trying to cut wherever they could, the classic way to save some money is to say, I assume that the pension fund will grow at 10% per annum from now on. And so therefore it will make huge amounts of money. We don't need to invest in the pension. The market will take care of itself.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden, 5 years later, 6 years later, you didn't put any money in, and now there's a massive hole of unfunded liabilities.
Absolutely, yes, yeah.
And so that's what's been happening, all right? Okay, so on while they've been creating this hole, they're still spending more and more and more. On a national level, the share of state education spending going to pension costs has now gone from 7.5% in 2001 to 14.5% in 2018, but they're still digging this massive hole at the same time. If that money went to teachers' salaries, it would increase by 20% now, before we even worry about the hole they're in it, right? All right. So this completely wrecks state budgets, obviously, because they have to be paying for pensions instead of paying for salaries and for everything else they need to pay for. But it doesn't even go to the teachers. this is the thing. It doesn't go to the teachers because most teachers don't qualify. Because another thing they do is institute all these rules, so they have to pay out so much.
Yes.
And in most states, there's a period of 10 years, 15 years that you need to be a teacher before you get anything from these pensions. And a lot of them don't. In fact, nearly 40% of teachers, actually, before I get to that stage, only about 20% of teachers stay in their jobs long enough to receive their full pension benefits.
Yes,
So most teachers aren't even getting these benefits. But at the same time, the states, because they're trying to save money, if they have a pension, they don't need to pay into Social Security if they don't want to. And a lot of them elect to not pay into Social Security for the teachers. That's their government-provided pension, as opposed to the state government, the federal government has a Social Security. So 40% of teachers aren't enrolled in Social Security. So they're not enrolled in Social Security, and they're not going to get their pensions, a lot of them.
Yes, yes.
And even the ones who will get their pensions, they're probably not going to get them anyway because there's a $640 billion hole that's never going to get filled.
By the way, okay, trivia question.
Yeah, go for it.
What is every Republican's favourite Democratic governor, especially your Wall Street Journal types?
I can't think off the top of my head.
Gina Raimondo
of
Rhode Island. And
Yes.
the reason why?
Why is that?
Because she financialized pensions
Oh,
in the state, which was
So the private
hailed.
sector thing.
Yeah. So and I think it was in 2016. I first heard about this because I heard Mary Kissel from the Wall Street Journal rabbiting on about how this is a genius solution to the pension problem, and only the Wall Street Journal was giving this the attention it deserved. And I remember at the outset of the pandemic, Hugh Hewitt was urging Trump to call like this bipartisan group of governors together. Gina Raimondo was the only Democrat that he included. So she was being hailed as a genius, but yeah, now everyone's just fucked.
I'll tell you the problem. Oh, well, yeah.
Yes.
I don't even need to tell you. You can see it for yourself. The problem with private sector pensions is that it's great when everything's going well.
Yes.
But if you're, say, a country like America, which doesn't have a lot of safeguards, when you have a recession, you have a real recession.
Yep.
It's zeroed out.
Yes. Totally.
Bye-bye pension.
Yep.
So I know in Australia we have our super as well.
Yes.
But the Australian system, Australia doesn't have recessions like America has recessions.
No.
In fact, lately Australia hasn't had recessions at all, although obviously that's changing at the moment.
Yes.
But even so, ours is nothing like America's.
No.
So that's the problem there, as Gina Raimondo is discovering. Anyway, just to finish off what I was saying, I was pretty much there.
Yeah.
So you have a situation where the budgets are ruined.
Yes.
They have no money to spend on other stuff.
Yep.
The teachers aren't getting the pensions anyway.
No.
And you have a whole bunch of retirees coming through the system who don't even have Social Security.
I told you this was going to be depressing.
So everyone is fucked.
Yeah.
So that is the reason you need to pay the states money because of the balanced budget amendments. When you have this kind of system, when a recession comes, they just need to keep them in the black because otherwise everyone is screwed and that will prolong the recession big time for the country. So that is that.
Household worst metaphor ever for a government. Also, households borrow money. State governments don't.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. They're even worse. In a worse situation
worse.
than a household.
Actually worse.
Is there anything you want to say before we wrap up? Because I know you got to go soon. So.
Was there anything?
I don't think I'm just flicking through on the stuff that you said. I'm not sure there's anything else. I think we've got all your stuff.
Yeah.
There as always, there's stuff which is left over for me, which is why that last podcast went for 2 hours.
Yeah.
But I'll just say one thing, which is a little follow-up frenzy. I don't think that was follow-up frenzy. I got to look up what that song was. Anyway, on police unions, there was a great example of police unions being shit.
Yeah.
The other day.
What a surprise.
And I want to share it with you guys. This is a great classic example of the problem with police unions.
Yes.
There was a police union called... I'm trying to find it. Brevard, I think it was. I looked it up. Brevard Police Union. It's in Florida. They sent out let's just leave them for a second. Did you see a video last week with all the police brutality videos going around?
Yeah.
There was one in Atlanta of these two cops who pulled over a car with two uni students, and they broke the window for some reason, slashed the tires for some reason, and then demanded them to come out, and they were just scared.
Yeah.
So they just froze.
Yeah.
And so they just started tasing them over and over again. Tasing, dragged them out of their car, and then arrested them for no apparent reason. I was watching, I was going...
Roid rage.
I was going, there must be something I'm missing here
It's
about
totally roid rage.
why they're going after these kids for.
Yeah.
And I just read a story about this, that those cops ended up getting suspended. It turns out they didn't have a good reason at all. And so they got suspended, which is good. It's good that there is accountability.
Yes, yeah.
But Brevard Police Union in Florida personally invited those cops to come to Brevard County to join their police force.
Wow.
They personally invited them after that suspension. And they said they will look after them. We'll look after you. And
we need men who can smash a car window and then tase someone through it.
And they also invited the 57 cops who resigned from the task force in New Jersey as a result of those two guys pushing over the 75-year-old.
Did they want the Buffalo cops as well?
Look, in the article I saw, it didn't include them.
Yeah.
But I would love it if they did.
Can I say one last thing? Yes. Because we mentioned Buffalo, and I feel Buffalo isn't a place that we talk about.
We don't. We barely talk about Buffalo.
Very much. Buffalo has some of the most unique regional cuisine in the United States. Now, do you know the story of how buffalo wings came into being?
No, I don't.
It was...
I assume it's not from actual buffalo.
Well, people didn't used to eat chicken wings. They were just not a part of the chicken that people were interested in. And one day, this bar in Buffalo, it had ordered chicken necks, as you do to make soup and stuff, but instead they got wings. And they're like, oh, well, what are we going to do with these? And they got the idea, because they had a largely Catholic clientele of guys who wouldn't eat meat on Fridays. But once it ticked over past midnight on Friday, they, marinated these wings in some spicy tomato sauce and brought them out and go, hey, a midnight snack. That is the birth of the buffalo wing.
Wow.
So now the buffalo wing is now incredibly famous. And one of the things I miss most about America is the chain Buffalo Wild Wings.
Oh, I've never been there, but I really want to go.
It is amazing. I used to go at about 11 at night with the newspaper. Often the Wall Street Journal, actually, because their reporting was really good. Anyway, so they're most known for the buffalo wing. But if you really want to be a connoisseur of upstate New York regional cuisine, what you got to get your hands on is the garbage plate. Have you ever heard of a garbage plate?
I've never heard of the garbage plate.
Good. This is the homework. Look up a garbage plate.
Okay.
It's really quite amazing.
Yeah.
Remember, Dr. Dave is not providing health advice here.
This is not that kind of doctor.
I'm not that kind of doctor. But if you want a cultural experience, garbage plate.
Just before we go, Dr. Dave, I want to play you a clip. And I want you to weigh in for me whether this is good or bad. Is this guy a dick or do we like him? This is Ben Sass in the Senate.
Yeah. I'm already leaning towards dick.
Yeah, let's see.
Mr. Chairman, before you go to Senator Cruz, can we get a sense of how long we're going to be here?
Yeah.
Because some of us have other committees, and with all due respect, I don't think anybody in private ever disagrees with me when I say it's bullshit the way people grandstand for cameras in here. The reality is, if we didn't have cameras in this room, the discussion would be different. The Senate doesn't work. It doesn't diffuse the partisan tensions that are leading the country toward dissolution. I'm for transparency. I'm for print reporters being everywhere. I'm for audio transcripts being everywhere. But 90% of our committees are about people trolling for sound bites. That's what actually happens. So some of us have other work to do. People can troll for sound bites whenever they want. But can we at least have a sense of when we're going to take our votes so people can come back?
Wow,
Okay.
That's really, really meta.
Okay, exactly. So, everything he said is correct, but there is no bigger troll for sound bites
an absolute description
than
of what he
Sass.
was doing.
So what's the verdict?
Meta troll.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dave, for your wise counsel.
Absolutely. Are you going to have a guest next week?
No.
Okay.
I'm gonna. I don't want these guys to get used to it.
I want to see more guest spots.
There will be more guest spots, but not next week.
Okay.
We'll probably have one the week after.
See you next week.
So see you later, Peppers. Thanks for tuning in.
Peppers.
Leave your comments as always, and bye-bye.